Hello everyone, welcome back, and thank you for joining us on the Live Unreal with Glover U podcast, where every week, Jeff Glover and the Glover U coaches will dive deep into the questions that you are asking. They understand the challenges you are facing on a day-to-day basis because they still work every day on the front lines of real estate, with Jeff and his team closing over 1,000 homes per year. In today's episode, Glover U head coach Kate Simon talks to Tommy Kunkel about shifting your mindset. We'll learn from Kate how shifting your mindset can help you get through times of uncertainty. Now let's hear from Kate Simon.
So we're here today with Glover U head coach Kate Simon. She got into the real estate industry at the age of 19 as Jeff Glover's, I believe, first inside sales associate. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the first. His sister and myself, we both were like pioneering that back in 2009. Yeah.
That's so cool. And then were you doing that like summertime while you were getting your psychology degree or? Okay.
Yeah. I got connected with Jeff. 19, I was home in between, college semesters and, said, hey, I heard you're opening a team. I heard you're starting a team. I kind of need a job. Let's explore what those opportunities are. And he threw me in a cubicle with a stack of expireds because back then it was, 08, 09 in Detroit. I mean, we had plenty of expireds.
Yeah. So you got in, you started as an ISA. Did you step out and finish your college degree and then step back in, or did you come in every summer and do it?
Yeah. So I can't remember if it was my sophomore or junior year. It was, I had at least 1 or 2 more years of college. It was one of the two. And I was really grappling in the middle of that summer with, I really love what I'm doing. I really love how I'm helping people. And I also had this like background story of not really knowing what I wanted to do with my major and not really loving it. At the time, I know you'll get into this. I graduated with a psychology degree, and I always took psychology classes because I was passionate about it. But my degree at the time was biomedical science, which I still laugh. I don't even know how I kind of like fell into that because I cried through like every single chemistry class I had. It was like really not for me. And I kind of hit my stride with, relationship building, with connecting with people, with helping them through this whole ISA experience. And I really felt like, wow, if I'm enjoying it to this much, I hope whatever I'm doing, I'm enjoying this much for the rest of my life. So I kind of had this aha moment at the end of the summer where I wanted to finish college, and I did, but I knew that as soon as I got done with college, I was ultimately going to get right into real estate.
Nice. That's a phenomenal thing and an insight that at that age to be able to pick that up and realize that, wow, what I'm doing sucks and I don't want to be doing that. And you find what you do and you kind of redirect and go towards that instead. And to pick that up at that age is just awesome.
Well, it was also an interesting conversation too, because of course, like all of my peers in college, like they were, really like ramping up with their major and these internships and, whether they wanted to go on to grad school, med school, whatever that looks like for them, what they wanted post-college life to look like. And as I got more resolve for what I wanted it to look like for me, I was very confident in saying, no, I'm getting my real estate license and I'm going to go into real estate. And like, there was always this like very uncomfortable pause where people didn't really know how to respond to that. Like, you're in college right now, but you're essentially saying that your goal is to get, some sort of trade certificate to go to trade school. And like, that's your goal. And I was like, yeah, 100%. Yep. So it always like really kind of threw people off, especially, those who are a little bit more like, they take a lot of pride in their academics, and I did as well, but I just sort of knew that was where my passion was, and I was just going to go for it. And
so from there, you jumped in, and eventually you got licensed and jumped in, sold real estate, and you sold like 30, that's not a word. 40 homes your first year, is that correct?
Yeah. And I mean, when we talk about like a year in real estate, I mean, there's really like the calendar year and then the first like 12-ish months of being licensed. Yeah. And it was something close to that within, honestly, probably the first like 12 to 18 months of like actually getting up and running. So yeah. And that was all within the system of what, Jeff was sort of teaching me and mentoring me of, hey, focus on this and focus on this next. And I was just really in this mode where I was at the time, I think it was like 21 of just writing contracts for people. And I didn't really fully understand the implications of the purchases they were making, but I was just sort of putting one foot in front of the other and swinging at whatever kind of came my way. So
that's awesome. And for anybody watching this that doesn't that isn't in real estate, that is a huge number to start. And I'd say 90% of real estate agents never hit that mark their entire career. So to do that right out of the gate, that is something awesome.
Thank you. And I felt lucky that that was my exposure, right? I didn't know that that wasn't normal, you know? And I mean, I'm looking at Jeff, who like, we've always kind of had this like very like sibling relationship. And like, he's always kind of been my big brother. And here he is, you know, selling 100, 150 houses a year. So of course to me, 40, I was just mad that it wasn't more, you know
right.
what I'm saying? So that was like it's probably like my naivety and my like tunnel vision, but also it was sort of an asset at that time because I really just wasn't focused on anything else.
But that's awesome. I mean, you look back at like Darren Hardy, he sold 16 houses, I think, his first 16 weeks. Or no, it was Cody Gibson. He sold 16 houses his first 16 weeks, and then he didn't sell one week. And it was getting towards the end of the week, so he told his boss or the head guy, he's like, I haven't gotten one, but I'll get it. He's like, right. Nobody else sells a house a week. Right. And he completely screwed up his mindset. He's like, I didn't sell anything for 4 more months.
Yeah.
It just completely messed me up.
Well, it's really interesting because this is probably going to play into more of what we talk about today, but it's sort of like, all right, what scoreboard are you playing against, right? Like what you know standards are you measuring yourself against on whether you're winning or losing? And at that time, with very limited experience, that's all I knew, and it was sort of like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and there is no try, there is no fail, you know. So
no, you just show up and you fall in love with the process, you do the steps, and you get the results.
Exactly, yeah.
That's cool. And then, so you were with Jeff for a while, sold a bunch of houses, and then you moved out to California. And did you start your own team, or did you go out on your own there?
So I was always a solo agent out there. I started initially in Malibu, which is like, again, probably one of the most like naive, sheltered decisions like a 23-year-old from the Midwest could probably have made, you know, especially considering I didn't know the world of real estate outside of this like very safe nest of what was Jeff Glover and Associates. I knew how to win within this model, and what I was learning was at a high level. So I thought, why not? I could just pretty much pick up what I'm doing and move to what I later found out was like one of the most competitive markets in the country. And I mean, I'm talking about like, how do you find a house for somebody when everything's a pocket listing, right? And it was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a challenge. So I started my career up there. I had a mentor up there who, you know, really helped me kind of understand the ropes and learn what it meant to sell real estate, luxury real estate, not just real estate in California. And I spent about 6 to 8 months up in Malibu. After that, it wasn't for me, the actual luxury product. I didn't love the experience. I didn't love what I was doing. So I moved down to Orange County. And if anyone's familiar with California, it's about 60 miles south. Kind of posted up in Laguna Beach, which is where I lived. But my market was Irvine, Tustin, and what we would consider like your normal day-to-day houses, like your 4-bedroom, 3-bath, you know, your regular real estate. And number one, I was more comfortable in that space, but also that's where the transactions were actually happening, right? So I had, as cool as it was to walk through these 10, 15, $20 million houses, you have to also make a paycheck. And if those aren't the houses that are moving, you kind of have to focus on what's actually like turning over in a market. So I really cut my teeth on a lot of those transactions down there in the $600,000 to $800,000 range.
Nice. Yeah, $1 million listings plus are awesome. Like, they're great to have, but your bread and butter has got to be what's moving every day, every week, every month.
Exactly. And it's very much in that luxury market. It's very much feast or famine. I mean, you might do 4 or 6 of those houses a year, and like that is fantastic. But when one of them falls out, like that devastation, at the time, I didn't have that appetite for risk. And honestly, today, I don't think I even still would. And I liked having the smaller, consistent wins that I could kind of count on over time.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way to go. So you went from the Boo down to Laguna Beach, and then eventually you got done with that and moved back to Detroit and teamed back up with Jeff and became his coach.
Yeah. So it was kind of an interesting story, because the story in and of itself of like how I made it in California is an entirely different story. I mean, by the time I got down to Laguna, I was really down to my last 90 days of living expenses. I mean, you can't even, sneeze in California without it costing you $100, let alone, I was set on, if I'm going to be in California, if I'm going to be 2,500 miles away from my family, born and raised in Detroit, I'm not gonna not be by the ocean, right? Like I was sort of like maybe immature in my approach on not being willing to compromise with that. So the life I wanted to live out there was one that, obviously I was burning through money really quickly. So I sort of found myself backed in a corner where I was starting over again in a new market. Sure, I'm in California, but I still don't know Irvine. I still don't know Orange County. And I have to now literally walk streets, door knocking. I would make probably 40 contacts a day. I think I would door knock maybe 4 hours every single morning. And I was door knocking in the morning, previewing property in the evening, running 2 to 3 open houses every weekend. And I did that for a solid 60 days. But on top of that, it was like, okay, no, but how am I going to pay my bills? So I started reaching out to the colleagues that I knew back in Detroit, because remember, I had sort of been known as like this like success story in Jeff's system. And I had people reach out to me all the time that were like, hey, how did you do this? Hey, how did you prospect at a high level? So I had to make a business decision. And I said, listen, I will train you on this. I will help you get to this level. But it's going to be X amount per month. And I started coaching people back in 2014, 2013, maybe, of how to just become a bulletproof ISA. So my days actually started at 4 a.m. because my commitment to them was I would prepare with you, like I would do some role play with you, and then I would actually be on the phones with them while they were prospecting. So I would be like 3-waying with them, and they would be on the calls with people, but I would be like, okay, say this next. Okay, no, this is how you want to handle this. So it was like, it was crazy. Like I look back at those days and I would literally like be, I had a roommate at the time, so I'd have to leave at 4 a.m. and I'd literally be like in a car in the parking lot somewhere, like prospecting with somebody like in the Detroit market. So I had a handful of those clients who were like kind of feeding me until I was able to kind of break through and actually focus full time on just selling real estate.
That's cool that you're able to do that. And that you're smart enough to transition, pick up the opportunity while still building the other thing that you want. Yeah, that's cool.
And I kind of had this, there was definitely a period of time that I didn't know if I was going to make it. It was probably 10 times harder than anybody could have ever prepared me for. And even when I was out there, I'd have, colleagues reach out to me and say, oh my gosh, I want to do what you're doing. I want to move to California. And I always took the no BS approach. And I was like, save twice as much as you think, and be prepared to get your butt kicked. And if you don't have that tolerance, do not uproot your life and come out here, because it is probably one of the hardest things that you're ever going to do. So make sure you really want to do it. But how that kind of parlays into how Jeff and I always kind of stayed in contact was, I was sort of doing this thing underground. Like I wasn't like a real like coach, like with a website or anything, but I was kind of doing this like underground thing. And simultaneously, he was working with a group of team leads on the East Coast who he was sort of coaching, right? Where it wasn't his main focus, but we were both sort of coaching in our own way. And as the years kind of progressed and I developed my career more and more out there, I was doing it. I was selling real estate. I was checking that box that I said was so important to me, but I wasn't fulfilled. And I took a very long, it took a very long time to sort of explore that and figure out why I wasn't fulfilled with it. And, I always kept in touch with Jeff. We've always had, that kind of mentorship relationship. And I remember sending him an email. It was maybe the day before New Year's, and it was right before 2017, year 2016. And I just thought to myself, if I could make this a perfect situation where I could still work with that team, with that group of people that I was so passionate about, that brought out, so much life in me, and still be in this life, what would that look like? So I sat in a coffee shop, the day before New Year's, and I was just sort of journaling this whole scenario of how could we potentially come up with this coaching company? How could we potentially come up with this relationship where I'm remote in California, but I'm able to help people on a model and a system that I know so well. And I know that Jeff and Taylor were kind of simultaneously having conversations about that didn't involve me, on how could we actually make Jeff Glover and Associates, the successful team, into a brand where we could help other agents around the country. So I sent him that email, and it was very much a, hey, I love the idea, not now, not now, not now. And then, I kind of kept my head down and kept working. And it might have been 6 or 9 months later, and he sent me a message, and he called me and he said, okay, it's time. And I remember we had that conversation, and I got off the phone with him, and he was like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have the first Live Unreal retreat. It's going to be open to the public, 2018. It's time. And the conversation, I remember it vividly. It was in September. I was in my kitchen in Laguna Niguel, and I called my husband, and I said, this is it. This is the call. This is the thing I've been sort of waiting for. I'm going all in. And at that point, while I was still selling in California, I'd already made up my mind I was moving back, and like I was going to eventually get back to sort of like the source, right? So I started, with his help, with Taylor's help, I started Glover U while I was out there towards the end of 2017, really publicly launching it in 2018. And then we moved back to Detroit, back to the hub here by, I think it was September of 2018. So that was sort of how that all fit together.
Okay. Wow. That's a really cool story. And then at that point, that's kind of when you got into bodybuilding, personal training as well at the same time?
Yeah. So it was kind of happening simultaneously. 2016, 2016 was the year that we got married, and I knew that I didn't want to get like super peeled and like shredded in a wedding dress, because that's kind of a weird look. So I kind of told myself that like, all right, once we kind of got through that 2017 would be like the year, if I really wanted to go far with it, that I would kind of, go deep there. So yeah, I had a personal training coach that I worked with remotely. She was actually up in Portland, and I worked with her on a weekly basis on my nutrition and on my plan. And I went like super deep into like that whole journey of fitness, like the same year that Glover U was more or less being born. So it was a really like weird thing to happen simultaneously.
Yeah, that's insane to be able to do that, because my wife's a personal trainer. A lot of her friends and clients are bodybuilders, and to see, I've seen the back end of the psychology that goes into it and the breakdowns that come along with it. So to be able to work on that inside self and the outside self and still maintain everything. Yeah. And trust me, I mean, if my husband was in the room, I don't know how much I was like maintaining things, right? I mean, and I think at certain points in prep, and I know your wife can probably attest to this, that there's some points where you're kind of going through the motion and you're following a plan, but once you kind of get closer to that show date and your body fat gets to a certain percentage, there's not much else you're doing besides eating, sleeping, and training, and then obviously adding in the whole posing component. But it's a really interesting like personal development journey, because as you said, I mean, you're fully exposed. Your excuses are fully exposed, and as you go week by week, your layers are being peeled back, but not just your physical layer, not just your muscle, not just your fat. It's your emotional resolve, right? It's how much mental tolerance you have for a very painful situation. It's being in a room of people who are eating without thinking and staring at a cookie and knowing exactly how many macros that is and how many months until you can have that again. Yeah. And being able to kind of develop that willpower. And it was obviously, a mentally painful process at the time, but it's one of those things that honestly, even though I don't compete anymore and fitness is still a part of my life, thing that has forever changed me, because I sort of feel like I arrived at myself to a deeper level through that process that I wouldn't have been able to reveal had I just stayed in this zone of working out here and there and sort of tracking, sort of not. I mean, it really exposed me to my core in some really cool ways. Yeah, and it does too. I mean, like I said, I haven't done it. I don't have the desire to, because I've seen what it does. Yeah. But if you get below a certain body fat percentage, that whole croc brain kind of takes over. Yeah. You don't have a lot of choices anymore. You stick to it and you do it, or you're just going to fly off the hinges. And it's. Well, and it's a very chemical thing too. I mean, there's a lot of things going on with hormones and, your thyroid. I mean, you unfortunately put your body in a non-maintainable state. And there is a lot of mental and emotional brain fog, and you're probably showing up in relationships, half the way that you should, and it truly is non-sustainable. But if you can hold on for a second and just look at what you're able to create with yourself, if you're able to sustain a level of mental discomfort, it was probably one of the most amazing things that I've done so far in my lifetime. It was really cool. That is. Yeah. Yep. It kind of reminds me of an analogy. Have you ever read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me? I've read snippets of it, not the whole thing. Okay. Well, you got to jump in and read it. It's amazing. Yeah. So he was raised really poor, abused, everything like that. But one thing he had, his mom, regardless of how little money they had, anything, she always had a cookie jar.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always somehow manage to keep that cookie jar full. So when he did something good or anything, he'd get a cookie. He'd get to reach his hand in and grab a cookie, whatever it was. There was like a hodgepodge because she never cleaned it out. It was just a cookie, and she keeps filling it up. So he took that analogy. So he lost 106 pounds in 3 months before going into SEAL training. So every time he'd have a mental breakdown or get close, he switched that analogy to having a mental cookie jar. Every time he did something good, every time he met a new mental barrier, anything, he'd put that in his cookie jar. So if he had a hard time, he'd reach in and grab a cookie from that jar. So that was kind of how he would get through those mental barriers. And now his cookie jar is so full, he's beat his brain up so much that his cookie jar is so full he can grab it anytime he wants and get through almost anything. And
it's so interesting, and I feel like we could do an entire different conversation just on like the role of like the emotional like payoff of certain decisions, whether it be, you know, food choices or whatever. But it's this whole notion that, you know, we earn something, and this is the thing that we choose if we're feeling something, right? And there's a book, one of my favorite, I guess she created the Whole30 program. Okay. And she's got a book called It Starts With Food. And it's not about a diet. It's about our relationship to the food that we choose. But I also see that a lot in our coaching clients too, about the relationship and the meaning they choose to attach to certain success, right? The emotional relationship, the value that they get from selling X amount of houses per day, per week, per month, whatever that looks like. Kind of like what you were telling me. You said it was Steph Campbell, who was like 16, a house for 16 weeks, or was it Steph Campbell?
Cody Gibson.
Yeah. And so it's like that was his standard for himself, right? And I think that because I know that, you know, you wanted to kind of talk about mindset today, and I know we're, you know, making our way there. That's one of the biggest reasons why I see a lot of people mentally struggling right now, is because they sort of don't know what to do with the goalposts, right? I mean, they're playing in this arena where they know that if they sell a house a week, they're winning. Or if they sell, you know, this many a quarter, they're winning. Or if they make this much income, they're winning. Or if they set an appointment, they're winning. And they sort of have this like proverbial scoreboard up at all times. And honestly, I play into that as a coach, right? I mean, it's part of my job to make them aware of what the scoreboard is and how we're tracking, right? But that it becomes a dangerous position when we're focused on the outcome of whether or not we're winning or losing based on what we're able to do, like what we're able to bring as an outcome, rather than the process itself. So a lot of the challenge that I'm seeing out there with a lot of these agents who may or may not be mentally struggling with what's the point, oh my gosh, what's going on with this year, is really not giving themselves permission to move those mile markers, or heck, turn the scoreboard off altogether, right? Like we're all in the same arena. We might not have the same seats right now. We might not all be on the field. We're all in the same arena, and all of our scoreboards just got unplugged, right? We all don't know what this is going to look like for the rest of 2020. So like, give yourself permission to be in that space, and then turn towards what's the next best thing I can do right now. And that comes into play with having more of a process-oriented goal rather than a result-oriented goal. And while both are important, most of the time you only see people focused on the result-oriented goals. So when those results are blunted, or they're muted, or we're forced in a situation like right now in real estate, or right now in Michigan, real estate's non-essential, right? So like we can't even do that. And if you can't take a listing, or if you can't put a house together, what does that mean? Are you a failure now?
Yeah. You just lost your identity, kind of. Like, what are you? Yeah.
Correct. So there's this whole, really, it's kind of funny how this is tying in. The process I went through with bodybuilding of peeling away the layers of ego, peeling away the layers of identity to get down to the core of who am I and what is this? It's a very painful process. And I feel for everybody who's going through that for the first time. Yeah. Or in a way that, you know, severely affects them, right? Where they don't know if they can pay their mortgage and stuff like that. That's what I've noticed most in regards to how and why, at least for a lot of our clients right now, what they struggle with most about what's going on right now is just not knowing how they relate to it and whether or not they're winning or losing. And if they don't know whether they're winning or losing, it becomes very hard for them, at least for how they've judged in the past, whether or not they're worthy, right?
Yeah.
And that becomes a very painful experience.
Yeah. And I've done kind of both sides of it. I've had the goal, and you love the goal, and you go and you work your butt off to reach a goal, financial, whatever it is, and you hit it, and then you're unfulfilled.
Yeah.
So you have real estate, you have the ongoing goal. I sold a house a week. I sold 4 a month, 5, 6, whatever it is. And as long as you're hitting that, you're feeling good. As soon as it goes away, what are you? Like, your ego's tied to that.
Yeah.
So I've learned that you got to love what you do, and you got to love the process. So instead of loving that end goal, you fall in love with what you're doing every single day, regardless of if you get the result. Because you know, if you do it long enough, the result's going to come. But even 100%. That's kind of been stripped away right now. I mean, is that
100%? And it also sort of it creates this. Okay, in a different scenario, when we are goal focused rather than process focused, we know this. There's times where we've had 4 or 5 days where we know we haven't done our job in real estate, and then we get a call from a past client that says, "Hey, Kate, come list my house." And in our mind, we've succeeded.
Yeah.
But if you ask yourself the question, but did I do the work necessary to keep me succeeding? Well, that's a little bit of a different question, right? So there's almost a false positive when that listing pops up, because you're like, oh, well, cool. I didn't need to do the work because it showed up over here. And you're sort of, conditioning yourself that, again, you're valuable, you're valid if this shows up over here, but not because of the work. And one of the things that I learned, trust me, I tried to fight this numerous times, but I learned to a very, very deep degree with bodybuilding was, the end result, at least in the competition that I did, it was a bikini competition, whatever, where, okay, you got to have shoulders like this, you got to have abs like this, you got to have glutes and legs that look like that, right? Well, okay, but you don't wake up with abs like that, right? You don't wake up super lean. It's a balancing act of sleep, of stress, water, nutrition, of making the decision, 5 times a day to weigh out your food and making those food choices. So it's getting people to see that the process of getting to that goal is actually hundreds of micro decisions every day, every week, every month. Yeah. And then the goal is a natural byproduct of that, right? So one of the things that I've been trying to inch my clients towards thinking about in the mindset is, great, regardless of how it shows up right now, because we can't control that, what process can we focus on so that we know that whenever we get some sort of green light, whatever that looks like, we know that we've done the work and the results will show up, right? And I think that's one of the hardest things people grapple with right now is, what should they be focused on, the process or the results?
And I'd have to say it's always process. Always.
100%.
You don't control results. You control, I'd say, 4 things in life, and results aren't one of them. You control the thoughts you think. Like, that's the biggest one, and that's the foundational one. So if you can't control your thoughts, I'm trying to pull something up really quick to share, because I can't take 100% credit for it. Here we go. Yeah. So, I mean, the thought, think of it like a pie or pizza or triangle. There you go. Yeah. Pyramid. Your thoughts are kind of the foundational piece of it. So once you master your mindset, your thoughts, all of that, the next thing you control is your time, what you do with your time, who you spend your time with. And all of that goes into the kind of process of it. And then you control who you spend your time with, and you control what you do with your money. Those are the only 4 things we have control over. Like, it's a really short list. So if you spend all your time and all your focus on a goal that you don't control, or on an outcome you don't control, you're not going to be fulfilled or happy. Like, it's just not going to happen for a long term.
Well, and I think that a lot of people in general, not even just agents, may in the back of their mind know that, and then they're sort of like put in this existential corner of, well, then what am I doing, right? If this goal of selling 100 houses a year isn't actually the key, now what, right? And I think it comes down to, like you said, having, and it's so cliche, but like, the journey is the outcome. And I know I kind of like roll my eyes at that saying, but it really truly is, the process of self-mastery and who you become in the process and what that reveals to you. I mean, I have a handful of clients who they say that their goal might be 100 houses or 50 houses or whatever, and halfway to the goal, we kind of keep digging in and exploring that, and they realize that the essence of that goal, which is probably time, money, freedom, they can actually achieve in a different way, right? And they become less attached to.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that how that kind of relates to what's going on right now is, I mean, you said it perfectly. You can really only control a few things, right? But the truth and the challenge is that's being thrown in our face right now more than ever, right? On a federal government level, on a state by state level, on a science level of how this whole thing is evolving, we are faced with the very painful reality that, oh crap, there is not a lot we can do to control this rather than go along for the ride. And it's showing up in very interesting ways for people, because the way that I'm sort of receiving how people are showing up with this is very similar, if not identical, to grief, right? I don't know how familiar you are with the stages of grief, but you've got, anger, you've got sadness, you've got denial, you've got bargaining, you've got acceptance. Yeah. And the thing about the stages of grief is they're not linear and they're not complete, meaning you don't go to stage 3 and then eventually progress to stage 4. You could get to anger and then move to acceptance and then get down to sadness and then go back to bargaining. And I think one of the hardest things about what's going on right now is we're all sort of forced in this world of unknowing. And it's plus grieving the life that we thought we were going to have, grieving the goals we thought we were going to achieve, grieving the freedom we took for granted for so long. And we don't know what to do with that, right? Because it's very heavy. It's very complex.
And for people like you and I and a lot of others in personal growth, development, everything, we choose to take that on. We choose to make a change, and we choose to go down that journey and figure out what's wrong, what's right, and everything. Sure, and a lot of these people didn't know. Like you said, it was just thrown at us, and they're like, "Oh crap, what happens now?" So it wasn't even a choice. And
I have a lot of empathy for my busy bees, as I call them, and they're kind of like my friends who they can't sit in a room quiet by themselves with their thoughts because, oh my gosh, those are kind of scary, and they love to kind of be around people, right? They love to kind of be in this world where they've constantly got stuff going on, and to some degree or another, of course, that's personality based, that's lifestyle based. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Where we run into a challenge with that is sometimes when uncomfortable feelings come up and we choose distraction, or we choose a happy hour, or we choose a guy's trip or a girl's trip, or we choose jamming our schedule full of things that distract us from that. Now we're carrying a backpack of things we've never dealt with. And when all of those other distractions are removed from us, that backpack is pretty ugly and it's pretty heavy. And there's a lot of people that might be opening that backpack for the first time in 5 years, 10 years, maybe ever.
Yeah.
And they don't like what they see. And I feel that, and I get that, right? But there is no zipping the backpack up and putting it back on. And you don't have to move through it all right this second, right now. But you do have to go through it at some point or another. And maybe it's not during this pandemic. Maybe it's not ever. But that doesn't absolve you from the things that you're carrying around with you and that feel heavy. And by the way, those are the same things that show up in future relationships as trauma, as, probably not the right decisions, or, hurting other people when you don't kind of go through that backpack and is this showing up? How can I work through this? And what's the lesson here for me? And I think that there's a camp of people who have sat with themselves and, maybe have gone deeper, have, done the work, done some self-exploration, where this time's a little bit more curious for them, where they get to sort of sit with their emotions and go with them. And then, it can be painful for people who might be fighting that process a little bit.
Yeah, they just kind of want to throw the backpack in the closet and forget about it for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and hey, I get it. And there's times where I'm there too, and I look at the backpack on the ground, and I'm like, I'm walking past you. I don't have the bandwidth to do this right now, right? Yeah. But it's acknowledging that there's some things that are showing up for people on a personal, on an emotional, on a mental level, where honestly, guys, we have a very unique opportunity to explore that, to sit with that, right? And understand that it's not going to hurt us. It's only going to make us a stronger person, a better version of ourselves on the other side of it.
And that's one of the main reasons I wanted to do kind of this series and bring you on, especially. It's a perfect time to be able to unzip that backpack, pull out those pieces, and go through them instead of just hiding or digging into Facebook or day drinking or whatever else people are doing right now.
Right. Right.
You said they all tie together.
Constant Zoom happy hours.
Yeah, all day.
Right.
Yeah, like you said, whatever's in that backpack, it's going to control your income. Like you might have a thermostat in there that's controlling your income that you're not happy with, but you don't want to look at it.
Right.
You might be in an abusive relationship due to something from your childhood that we don't want to look at. You might be, I mean, the list goes on, but
100%, yeah.
Whatever's in that backpack's got to be pulled out if you want to come out the other side better. So.
Yeah, and I think that the toughest truth in all of that is whether we choose to lean into that, whether we choose to look at that in the face or not, whether we choose to use this time to sort of explore why we're feeling the different things that we're feeling, it's still there, right? The turning the back on it doesn't empty the backpack, right? And I think that there's probably a level of frustration or anger or just confusion on how do I work through this, right? Because there should be a safe environment, whether it's with a coach, a counselor, a mentor who can kind of help you unpack this stuff if you've never looked at it before and you don't know what to do with it and you don't know what it means. So there's also that too, and making sure that you have the support if you need it to go through some of this confusing stuff that you're not sure what to do with.
And it's all out there. Whether you know you have a mentor or not, you can go out and find them.
Right.
There's always people out there that you can reach out to and ask questions to. It might be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like I started out, I'd take books as my mentors. I was stuck on boats. I didn't want to be like the people on the boats. I was like, I'd pick, I don't know, Brian Tracy was my new mentor. Whoever was, Tim Ferriss is my mentor this week. And so and then once I got off and I'm around human beings again, I'd identify the people I want to see and be around, and I would just kind of make them my new friends. So you can choose who you're around. You can choose, you might have to eliminate some, and that's kind of painful, or you don't have to eliminate them. I mean, cut them off, but you can distance.
Well, you're right. And yeah, I mean, maybe cutting off is a little, maybe that sounds extreme, but I think to some degree or another, like, the stuff that you're going to go through in this process or in any process, right? It has a strong potential to change you, and it changes your preferences, right? And probably the easiest and best example I have of that is like the further I got along in fitness, the less interested I was in doing like boozy brunches and like having a cocktail. Like I'm just not interested in it, right? And it wasn't a decision of like, I'm never drinking again, but as it stands, I haven't had a drink in 6 months and it's just not something I think about because it's not what I'm aligned with, right? So to some degree or another, yes, I don't have those happy hours with those specific friends anymore, but I have different people in my world where those relationships haven't necessarily been replaced, but they've been evolved into something that's more in alignment with where I'm at right now. And and I think that's the biggest concern is that there's a loss when you walk towards personal development, personal growth of what is my current life going to look like? And I think the long and the short is it's either going to evolve with you or you're going to evolve to a new surroundings, to a new group of people who are going to support you in that way.
Yeah. And it's going to happen no matter what. So if you make that choice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a natural progression. And like just how I met you. I was following Jeff and I just left a team that was toxic. It was an unpleasant experience. And somehow like we became Facebook friends. Like this person's awesome. And I ended up reaching out to you and you had no idea who I am. Like I'm just some stranger from across the country. And I think you spent 52 minutes on a coaching call with me.
I remember exactly where I was. I was visiting a friend of mine in California and I was literally driving through the desert on my way back to the airport. And I was like, listen, I got nothing but like literally like mountains and desert around me. Like you got me. So it was pretty good timing.
Yeah, that was awesome. I appreciate it so much. It made a huge difference. But like from that point, I was like, this person's awesome. I want them in my world to some extent.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And anybody watching this can do the same thing too. Like you pick somebody and say, hey, this person's cool. I know there's an author I followed for like 5 years and then randomly got a friend request from. So now I have a new mentor as well. I mean, so you can choose who you go with, where you're around, just by choosing what's in front of you, kind of what you focus on expands type of thing.
And I think it's really important, if somebody's sort of looking for, I guess, guidance or anchor points for like, where do you start, right? Like, how do you even go about identifying that? I think there's a couple things that come to mind. It's number one, like, what do you find yourself most curious about when you have the freedom to just think, right? Like, what do you Google after you're done doing work, right? What do you buy books on? What Instagram pages do you stop and pause and kind of go deep on? And for me, it was always like the health and fitness. So it was like, okay, cool. Like that became a natural progression where I just followed that curiosity, right? And then that second layer from there is understanding that like the people you're going to seek out to get you to that next level, whatever that level looks like for you, make sure to some degree or another that they're at a place in their life for whatever things you're asking about that you want to be in, right? So my fitness coaches and mentors aren't the same as my business coaches and mentors, right? So I have 4 or 5 different coaches for different areas of my life. So I think it's also important that you don't give, complete agency to one person over every facet of your life. And you sort of do the work to find out who is your trusted person in each area. And I talked about this with one of our coaching clients. He's been, not recently, but in the past, he was struggling with trusting himself with making decisions on like whether it was good or bad for his life. And we came up with the idea of creating like a board of directors in your life, right? Like find somebody who has a marriage like you want to have, find somebody who has the finances like you want to have, find somebody who has a business. And then once you've decided that like you trust them and that this is your person for this, you sort of eliminate the need to question what it is that they're telling you. And of course you can have a skeptical mind and be critical, et cetera, but that's how I relate to my coaches is if I'm struggling with something or if I say, I'm not sure if I should do X, Y, and Z, I know if I'm asking Jeff a coaching question, it takes the mental heavy lifting of me having to think about whether what he's saying is right or wrong, because I've already given him 3 levels of trust above it. And I trust that what he's telling me is going to put me on the right path. And I think that's the beauty of having a coach, a mentor, peers that you can look up to, in those respective areas of your lives.
Yeah. And that's something I kind of struggled with for a long time. I expected whoever I looked up to be perfect in all the areas. Like, I want this person that makes a bunch of money that's going to teach me to make money, also be a D-bag and have a perfect marriage.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work that way sometimes. You're like, okay.
Right. And I've learned over the years, because yes, I've kind of in the past, probably in my mid-20s or younger, I've like gotten in the habit of putting people sort of like on pedestals of like, oh, wow, this person real estate, therefore, they're great in all these other areas. And then some of these people that I put on pedestal, I was like, wait, this is your 4th marriage? Like, oh, is that success? Like, is that what I want? And I kind of had to, I struggled with that, right? Like, because I'm a very black or white person of like, if it's not this, then it's this. And I sort of had to separate, they say like the art from the artist. Like you have to sort of separate that, like, we're all sort of human and like, we're all sort of navigating this at our own pace and, in our own time for whatever that looks like.
Yeah. And like you said, with the person on the pedestal, you expect this person to be perfect and then you find out they're not. And then you're devastated and you're like, well, they're garbage and you want to throw them away now. You're like,
well, we do it with celebrities all the time, right? Like we like build it up in our mind that like, oh, wow, this person's probably the coolest and they would be like my best friend if I ever knew them. And then you like read some story about like how they showed up like at an interview and were like, wouldn't give like a 5-year-old an autograph or something like that. And you're like, oh, wow, like you're kind of a jerk, right?
Yeah.
That in and of itself, though, it's all about like kind of evolving your expectations of yourself and other people and how you want that to show up. Because to some degree or another, when you're evolving in your own coaching relationships and, if you have people that decide that you're their mentor one day, I mean, you also still want to have the freedom to be able to be human and not feel like you have to be perfect at everything. So it kind of goes both ways.
Right. Yeah. Because none of us are perfect. I wish we were. It'd be awesome. But we all have flaws. Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, sorry. I was just kind of looking at the notes. So we made some notes before we talked, I guess, kind of. And one of them that's kind of standing out to me is about the change, all the changes, and the only constant I've seen in the world is change. And growing up, I hated change so much. Like, I just despised it. I didn't want to change schools. I didn't want to change classes. I didn't want to change houses. We moved a lot. Every time we'd move, I'd be in tears. Like, I hated it. Like, I don't want to move. My friends, like, whatever it was. But finally, through life, I had to realize that change is going to happen no matter what. So you're going to either kind of predict where it's going and work on yourself and grow with it, or you're going to get blindsided like everybody just did, and you're going to be stuck in a really sucky spot being forced to change in a time you don't want to.
Yeah.
How are you seeing people kind of deal with that? I know it ties into the loving the process versus results.
Yeah.
But it's also a little different when it's thrown at you in a whole life aspect instead of just your business.
Absolutely. And I think it's important in this context to understand that the propensity for things to change exactly how they has always been there. And by the way, will always be there. And I think that that's really uncomfortable because the word that keeps coming up to me is attachment. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But part of our suffering with change, okay? And by the way, part of our suffering in anything, it could be in a relationship, how somebody shows up with us. It could be disappointment in a mentor, right? The root of all suffering, and at least from what I've read and what my mentors have shared with me, is attachment. It's our attachment to what something is and the meaning that we breathe into that attachment, right? So for you being a young kid who doesn't want to switch schools, these are my best friends forever, and I'm going to live out this life with them, and we project this attachment of you guys going to high school together, going to college together. Oh my gosh, everybody's in everyone's weddings, and we all have families together, and then that's ripped from you.
Yeah.
And now you're in this period of mourning for this life that sort of built up in your mind. And I think we do it with people. We do it with, real estate brokerages. We have an attachment for what we think it should be like, rather than, I know it's kind of cheesy to say, but like going with the flow and accepting and understanding what comes at us at any given point in time and making small decisions with the information that we have. And I think that, how I'm seeing people deal with that. Well, number one, I'm like really proud of all of our clients who are like rolling with the punches. I mean, they really are. Like they're doing fantastic. And whether they're just putting a show on for our coaching calls, I'm sure we all have, good days and bad days, but they're really doing a good job of wrapping their head around like how drastically life in their business has just changed. But I think that the looser we can grip, the more we can loosen our grip on attachment to how things should be. And by the way, that includes how our government's handling this, how other people should be handling this. I mean, you see it on Facebook all the time. The camp of people who are, oh my gosh, let's get this over with, and the camp of people that might prefer to lock down until there's a vaccine or forever. Who knows what that looks like, right? And there's anger and frustration and pain that's being exchanged when somebody's so attached over here and somebody's so attached over here, and there's tension that's being experienced. And we experience that tension when we're so attached to what we put on a pedestal as our goal, and that's not showing up. And now we need to decide where our worth is coming from, right? And how the rest of our year is going to sort of come together. So like I said, as change relates to me, I hear the word attachment, in that the better we can get at releasing any and all attachment to all things in all scenarios, the less painful these types of bumps in the roads become, right? And the less meaning we can attach to something happening the exact certain way, the more emotional plasticity, the more flexibility that we're ultimately going to have in our mindset and in our ability to deal with some of these curveballs. So if anybody's kind of listening to this and wondering, like, well, okay, I hate this feeling, how do I just get better at this? I think that, the answer is, it doesn't just happen, right? You don't just flip a switch and be okay with it. And anybody who's out there right now and says they're totally and completely okay with what's going on, they're either a robot or they're completely enlightened. I mean, I don't know of a, human being out there who's okay with that, right?
Yeah.
But I think it just becomes a very conscious process of us working through those sticking points. So For me, what that looks like, and I mean, meditation, journaling, I do a lot of my own meditation through the form of actually working out. I mean, that's when I kind of go deep on a lot of my thoughts and stuff like that. But I think it's really important that when we notice these sticking points, like this really doesn't feel good and I don't know why, rather than defending this feeling, an interesting approach would be going deeper and wondering why we're so attached to that in the first place. Why do I need to know when this is going to be over, right? Why do I need to know what this is going to look like in 90 days? And there's some real questions out there of, okay, well, I have to pay my bills, right? So that's a separate conversation. But assuming that your needs are going to be met and that they are met, what is so important about having this concrete knowingness? Because at the root of it, and we do this in every facet of our lives, it's kind of a facade, right?
Yeah.
It's not real. And it is a construct that we need in order to make it from day to day. I mean, it is a construct that we need to function as human beings. But it's not something that's meant to make us suffer more in a time that's already difficult.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the psychology part. Our brains are hardwired for survival.
Correct.
So the left side of the brain is the storytelling brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells a story, and that creates your reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tie it into kind of what you were saying with the attachment. The word I've always stuck with attachment is expectations.
Yes.
So whatever you expect is going to dictate, well, whatever you're attached to is going to dictate your expectations, which is going to dictate your feelings.
Yes.
It's kind of a loop. And I got this when I was a little kid. It was really weird. And it was from a comedian. And he said, he was talking about expectations. He said, shoot for the curb and you never miss. Which, so I like goals and systems and everything. So it's really hard for me to justify. But at the same time, when it comes to expectations for things you don't control, you got to just drop it and shoot for the curb because you can't miss that way. So you lower the attachment, you lower the expectation, and then you focus on the other things, and all the rest will circle back around, if that makes sense.
100%. And I think that if we can even get like even more like kind of airy with the whole example of like our experience is what's playing into our attachment and our expectations, right? Whatever we choose to expect or, form an attachment to is healing a piece of us that maybe we haven't done the work on and maybe we haven't healed, right? Like, okay, so if I need to sell 100 houses, I'm going to feel validated because somewhere along the line, I haven't found a way to be good enough as I am, right? Like that's kind of the source of it. And as we sort of look at like the grand scheme of things, that we're all human beings that kind of carry our own story for what that thing is we're looking for, whether it's acceptance, validation, appreciation, all of those things, it becomes kind of silly to think that any given scenario in the world is ever going to fit everybody's expectations, right? I mean, we're all sort of showing up as human beings with our own needs, our own ego, and that's okay. But we sort of need to watch that and say, look, this is the story I'm experiencing right now. This is the feeling I'm experiencing. It will come, it will go, it will pass. And yet I accept that I don't have an answer for this right now.
Yeah, there isn't one. Like,
right.
There's not enough data. There's predictors from the past. I like history. Like I said, I was stuck on a boat for a really long time. So I read a lot of history books. And if you go back for hundreds and hundreds, like recorded history, every 100 years, there's a pandemic, a massive one. In 1918, the Spanish flu lasted for 2 years.
Right.
Killed like a third of the population was infected. And 100 years before that, and 100 years before that. So we're right on track. But Ray Dalio,
good, right on schedule.
Yeah, we're right on track. I'm like, awesome. How did I not see this coming when I've read all about it? Ray Dalio went back and took kind of a snapshot for the last 500 years of all the pandemics and the ups and downs and everything. And basically what it is, you'll have this little blip. It's a dip in the thing, and then it kind of goes back to a new normal, which I hate that word so much.
Yeah, I know.
But, it does. I mean, it's not going to look like it did, but besides the people that are extremely affected and pass away, everybody else is going to adapt. It's going to have a new system. We might have a new monetary system, whatever it ends up being, but eventually it's going to go back to a new way of life, and everybody's going to be okay as soon as they adapt and open up and get used to it.
Well, and I think that we are kind of forgetting who we are, like as an evolutionary species.
Yeah.
And that so far in the history of the universe, we as humans who are on the planet right now have evolved past so many other things. And we're going to continue to do so just by our gut feelings and like our human nature, right? So while of course it feels like we've kind of gotten the rug like ripped out from underneath us, which of course we have, I think we also have to understand the opposite side of that, which is also we're an incredibly adaptive species, you know, for lack of a better term. And that like, we got this, right? It might not fit your expectations of when, and it might not look the way that you want it to look, right? Which is where the pain and the suffering comes in.
Back to the expectation.
But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's questioning whether or not the human race can overcome this, right? I think that we can all at least rest assured that like, we will have the tools to get through this. And it might be a year and a half. It might be 6 months. It might be longer. But in the grand scheme of life, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Just the blip on the radar. I mean, we've made it through 100% of our bad days, and we'll make it through this too.
Right. And I think that there's, you know, and I was listening to a podcast, and I know you asked me to share like a list of resources, so I will share them. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and oh my gosh, the thought just totally escaped my mind. But I'll share the podcast with the group, and maybe they'll get their own aha moment out of it. But there was something on the thread of what you were saying that reminded me we've made it through 100% of our bad days. Oh, and that like, yes, of course, this is a very uncomfortable place to sit in, much like in a very different sense, you know, when you're in the middle of competition prep and you just want to like get to the other side and have a piece of cake and have a piece of pizza. But like, don't forget who we're becoming during this time. Don't forget the lessons that we truly can dig into and what we can do with this time. And I'm not talking about like, oh my gosh, it's time to start working on your book, or it's time to start learning a new hobby. Because look, the scope of what people are dealing with, there might be a group of people who have that free time and like that feels good to them, but there's also a group of people that are just surviving right now, and that's okay too. Like, listen, if you don't come out of quarantine with like a best-selling novel or a podcast, like you're okay, you know? So it's, you know, like not everybody's going to like turn this into like, you know, a money-making creative opportunity.
That's 99.9% of the people. I mean, most of us are going to survive it and hopefully thrive on the other end, but it's not going to be some magic pill, life-altering, money-making venture for us all.
Correct. But it could also be this like really transformative experience for us if we let it. And I think that a lot of the pain and the suffering comes into play with resisting that. And I think that we could all, on all levels, no matter what it is, do a better job of sitting in that discomfort and moving 1, 2, or 3 steps closer towards acceptance. Okay. You know, even if it's reading an article that your opposing political person wrote and deciding that that's okay that you don't agree with it, you don't have to share it on Facebook with a paragraph of all of your angry thoughts. Like just
and respond to every thought that comes back from it.
Correct. And I think that comes down to like another thought that I think about a lot with our clients, and that's emotional stoicism. And I don't mean it in a sense of your emotions aren't real and you're a robot and pretend that they don't exist, but it's really the sense of separating the thoughts and the feelings you have from you as a human, and understanding that like you have this good thought right now, and guess what? In 20 minutes, you could have this bad thought and you could have these bad feelings, and you're going to keep experiencing those so long as we're human, so long as we're going through all of this that we are.
Unless
you don't have to react to every single thing that comes to your mind.
Yeah.
And I see people getting on this hamster wheel in these Facebook battles and these arguments, and it's like, I'm tired looking at it. You know, it's got to be exhausting jumping from which thought you're going to, you know, take hold of on any given day. And I think it's important to recognize that those thoughts aren't permanent, and it's okay if you feel them strongly, but just breathe through it, get through it for a moment, and let it go, you know?
And arguing about it's not going to change the other person. It's not going to change your outcome, and it's just going to waste your time and your energy. Like, I think we get 3 or 4 shots of glycogen through the day. Is that really where I want to spend my best energy arguing on Facebook about how this should be handled by somebody else.
Right.
Like, really?
Well, and like you said, and I've always kind of had that stance when it comes to politics. And of course, I have my own political opinions. Everyone's got their own political opinions, but they're very personal to me and my life experience and what I've experienced and what I'm hoping to achieve. So the whole notion of combating with somebody else over politics or how this is being done becomes a very personal conversation of you arguing whether or not the life you're living is more valid than the life of somebody else living. And when you put it like that, you're like, well, that's kind of stupid. We're all living a valid life and we all have our own opinion. And guess what? That's the beauty of we all get a vote, right? So that in and of itself, use your vote. That's all.
There you go.
You know?
Yeah, there's a comment, and I just saw it and then scrolled by it, but somebody posted about how the government is not handling it right. And then the other lady's like, well, if you don't like the governor, move somewhere. I'm like, that's not the point. If he doesn't like the governor, vote for somebody else next time. Just like you did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's and you know what? I think it's having the like compassion and I guess just the consciousness and the emotional intelligence that not everybody experiences life on the same playing field that you do. And by the way, that's okay. You know, and looking through people who, even the people who, you know, you can concretely say like, wow, that was really not the right move, or that's not the right way to handle something, you know, on a moral stance, but looking at situations like that with compassion and saying, wow, this person's doing the best they can with what they have. And sure, it probably could be better, but I have an incredible amount of compassion for them doing the best that they can right now, even if it's not great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for taking your time to join Kate today on the Live Unreal with Glover U podcast. To get started on having an unreal business, take the real estate self-assessment. After you complete the assessment, a member of Glover U will get on a call with you to create an action plan to improve your score. Go to www.gloveru.com/self. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Search for Live Unreal with Glover U on iTunes, Podbean, or Spotify, and subscribe today. Until next time, remember, the better we can get at releasing all attachments, all things, and all scenarios, the less painful these types of bumps in the road become.